Christmas Eve, 3 years ago, my family decided to do something different that year. Instead of the usual cozy cabin or home, we went to Holland Parks, this run-down Christmas-themed amusement park on the edge of town. It had been closed for years but reopened for one last holiday blast. It seemed fun at the time. We arrived at dusk. The place was a patchwork of flickering lights, peeling candy cane stripes, and a creepy Santa animatronic who sounded more like a death row. The smell of burnt popcorn and stale cotton candy lingered in the air. But hey, we were there for the nostalgia, right? It didn't take long to realize something was off. First, there was the ticket guy. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Deep circles under his eyes, his red coat fraying at the seams. When he handed us our tickets, he leaned in close and said, "Stay on the main paths, no shortcuts." We laughed it off, thinking it was part of the whole spooky ambience. It wasn't. We started with the crescent box. It creaked and groaned as the ancient horses bobbed up and down. My little sister, Sophie, picked the sleigh at the back. But halfway through the ride, she screamed. "Someone's behind me," she cried, jumping off the sleigh mid-spin. We all looked, but it was empty. My dad said it was her magic. I saw something. A shadow, maybe, ducking just out of sight. Next was the Ferris wheel. Sophie refused to go, so she stayed with Mom while Dad and I climbed into one rickety cars. As we reached the top box, I saw something that made my stomach flip. Down below, near the funhouse, stood a man. He was tall, wearing a Santa suit that looked had been washed in decades. His beard was gray and matted, and his face was painted white like a clown. I nudged my dad, but by another time he looked on. That's with a power cutout. The park went completely dark, except for the faint glow of the emergency lights. The Ferris wheel shuddered to a stop, leaving us stranded at the top. I remember looking down and seeing movement, something darting between the rides, fast and erratic. I thought it was my imagination. Speakers crackled to life. A voice, deep and distorted, echoed across the park. "All little children come to Santa. Let's play a game." I froze. Dad grabbed my arm, his knuckles white. When the wheel finally started moving again, we bolted straight to Mom and Sophie, only to find them near the entrance, staring at something in the ground. Is a big black Santa boot, splattered with what looked like blood. Before we could process it, Sophie whispered, "He's here." We turned, and there he was, the clown-faced Santa, standing at the edge of the carousel. His head bucketed, his grin too wide like he'd practiced it in a broken mirror. He waved, holding something shiny in his hand. A knife? The park was a maze of shadows and dead ends. Every time we thought we'd lost him, that distorted voice would echo again, taunting us. "Naughty or nice, I always find you." We finded it to the parking lot but as we climbed into the car, I noticed something. The ticket guy was gone. We sped off, hearts pounding, but the nightmare wasn't ending. When we got home, Sophie found something in her coat pocket, a candy cane wrapped in plastic. Scrawled across it in red marker were the words, "See you next Christmas." So what would you do if Santa decided to come for you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget, some traditions are better left in the past. Stay safe this holiday season and remember to lock your doors. Merry Christmas. Have you ever regretted going somewhere, even if it seemed magical at first? I know I have. This happened 2 years ago on Christmas Eve. In a place I thought would be unforgettable, for all the right reasons. But instead it became a nightmare I could never shake off. It started with my friend Mark convincing me to visit Frostwood Lodge, a massive, secluded winter retreat nestled deep in the mountains. They just opened a Christmas Wonderland, an indoor festival with ice sculptures, holiday lights, and of course, Santa's grotto. It sounded like the perfect way to escape the holiday blues. The lodge itself was breathtaking. Towering pines dusted with snow framed the glowing building. Inside, the decorations were straight out of a Christmas movie, golden garlands, sparkling ornaments, and a faint scent of cinnamon and pine in the air. Kids were laughing, couples were taking selfies. It was a Hallmark dream come true. It began when we walked into the ice maze. It was supposed to be a fun little attraction, with twisting frozen walls that reflected the soft glow of fairy lights. Mark and I joked about getting lost and freezing to death. Typical dark humor. But as we wandered deeper into the maze, I swear the temperature dropped significantly. Our breath came out in thick clouds, and the cheerful sound of carolers outside faded into a chilling silence. Then we saw him, Santa Claus, not the jolly old man you'd expect. No, this Santa was standing motionless at the center of the maze, half shrouded in shadow. His costume looked wrong. The red suit was dingy, almost brown, and his beard hung in scraggly clumps. He wasn't handing out candy canes or waving to kids. He just stood there facing away from us, clutching a rusty sack. Mark, being Mark, shouted, "Hey Santa, lose your reindeer." His voice echoed airily through the maze. Santa didn't move. Feeling uneasy, I grabbed Mark's arm and whispered, "Let's just go." But of course, Mark thought it was all part of the act. He walked closer laughing. Dude, are you okay? You need a coffee or... That's when Santa turned around. His eyes weren't human. They were pitch black, like twin holes cut into his face. His mouth stretched into a crooked smile, revealing jagged yellow teeth. And the sack he was holding, it wasn't full of toys. I caught a glimpse of something wet and dark spilling from its seams. Mark froze. Oh crap. Then Santa spoke. His voice was a guttural rasp like nails scraping against metal. You're on the naughty list. Mark screamed, and we bolted. The maze seemed to stretch endlessly, the paths twisting and turning into dead ends. No matter how fast we ran, I kept hearing the crunch of boots behind us. Not hurried footsteps. Slow, deliberate ones like he knew there was no escape. Finally, we burst out of the maze, gasping for air. The festival was still in full swing. Kids laughing, people sipping hot cocoa. It was surreal. Like none of them could sense the nightmare we just encountered. Mark and I ran to the parking lot, but our car wouldn't start. Figures, right? Meanwhile, I spotted Santa, or whatever that thing was, standing at the edge of the lot. He could empty eyes locked on us. As the car finally roared to life, we heard a soft tap-tap on the back window. I turned. It was the rusty sack, sitting on our trunk. He blood seeped through the fabric, spelling out 3 words, UOCNTRUN. We sped away, never looking back. To this day, I can't celebrate Christmas without feeling a chill. I stay away from ice mazes, holiday festivals, and most importantly, anyone dressed as Santa. Because if you ever yourself at Frostwood Lodge, don't make the same mistake I did. And remember, naughty or nice, he's always watching. It all began at St. Gabriel's Chapel, a quaint, snow-covered church at the edge of town. The kind of place that felt frozen in time, with its towering spires and flickering candlelight. I had joined the chair for a laugh, not because I could sing, but because the idea of being part of thing festive seemed normal. That night, the snowstorm outside was relentless. The roads were impassable, and the stained glass windows rattled against the howling wind. Our chair director, Ms. Ellie, was determined to rehearse for the midnight service. One more carol, she did, clapping her hands. But as we sang Silent Night, the church lights flickered. The organist, her Lutz, muttered about a power surge, but something felt off. It wasn't just the failing electricity. There was a smellish, metallic tang that didn't belong. I whispered to Anna, my fellow tenor, "I smell that." She nodded, eyes wide. Then, from the chair loft above us, a noising, a slow, deliberate dragging sound. Probably just the janitor, Ms. Ellie said, brushing it off. But when she looked up, her face paled. The loft was empty. The dragging sound came again, louder this time. Everyone froze. Then something tumbled down from the loft and hit the floor with a sickening thud. It was a single black feather. A nervous laugh escaped someone in the back row, but I couldn't take my eyes off that feather. Suddenly, the bell tower above us began to ring. 3 sharp chimes. St. Gabriel's bell hadn't worked in decades. Who is up there? Miss Ellie stammered, her voice cracking. I glanced around. The chair members were visibly shaking, some gripping their hymnals as if they were shields. Stay here, Miss Ellie commanded. But I wasn't about to let her investigate alone. I followed her up the creaking wooden stairs to the bell tower. Keep a chatterbox. The air grew colder the higher we climbed, so cold I could see my breath. At the top, we found the bell swinging wildly, its deafening clang reverberating through the church. But there was no one there. Instead, scrawled across the wall in what looked like frozen blood were the words. Far Te Danig. A scream from below shattered the silence. We bolted back down, nearly slipping on the icy steps. The chair had scattered, but Anna was still in the pews, staring straight ahead. Anne, what's wrong? I asked, shaking her shoulder. Her eyes were locked on the altar. I followed her gaze and saw Eddie, a figure draped in a black cloak, its face obscured. In its hand was a conductor's baton, and with a sinister flick, the chair resumed singing, but their voices were no longer human. It was a low, guttural chant, like something ancient clawing its way out of their throats. Stop it! I shouted. But the figure turned toward me, and I saw its face. Or rather, its lack of one. I grabbed Anna's hand and pulled her toward the exit, but the doors wouldn't budge. The figure raised its baton again, and the chair turned toward us, their faces twisted into grotesque masks of agony. Join it rasped, its voice like the crunch of snow underfoot. No thanks, I shouted, trying to sound brave. A hollow, bone-chilling sound, and the chair began to advance, their feet dragging like they were put on invisible strings. Anna grabbed a candle stand and swung it at the nearest singer, knocking them back. But when they hit the ground, their bodies dissolved into piles of ash. Remu, she yelled. We dashed toward the stained glass window. With a desperate lunge, I threw a pew through the glass, shattering. The icy wind hit us like a wall, but we didn't stop. We scrambled through the jagged frame and into the snow. When we finally looked back, St. Gabriel's was gone. Not just the chair, not just the figure. The entire church. All that remained was an empty, snow-covered field. Later, when I told the story, people laugh as a hallucination or some elaborate prank. But every Christmas Eve, without fail, I hear those 3 chimes echo through the night, and I know, St. Gabriel still wants its carols. What do you think of the Choir's last carol? Christmas Eve. Heavy snow blanketed the small, secluded village, turning the landscape into a frosted wonderland. The air was sharp and cold, biting through layers of clothing. An eerie silence filled the night. I stood before a rustic wooden cabin I had rented for the holidays, suitcase in hand. The glowing lights from neighboring cottages cast a soft, inviting warmth against the white canvas of snow. But something felt off. The stillness wasn't tranquil, it was oppressive. The cheerful Christmas lights seemed too bright. Their colors too vivid, like they were masking something sinister lurking in the shadows. My breath fogged up in the icy air as I pushed open the creaky door and stepped inside. The warmth from the fireplace welcomed me, but the faint scent of decay hung in the air. This trip wasn't meant to be ordinary. As a writer, I'd been struggling with creative blocks for months. Come in here, a village steeped in tradition and folklore, seemed like the perfect place to spark inspiration. Little did I know, that inspiration would come at a price. The book the next morning I wandered into the village square. Quaint cottages lined cobblestone streets and villagers bustled about, preparing for Christmas festivities. It was picturesque, the kind of place you'd see on a postcard. I found myself drawn to a small, dimly lit shop tucked away in an alley. Its window displayed dusty trinkets, faded ornaments, and an antique clock that didn't seem to tick. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old paper and varnished wood. Looking for something special, a frail old man with a crooked smile emerged from the shadows. I hesitated before explaining my reason for visiting the village. His eyes gleamed with a strange curiosity as he shuffled to the back of the shop, returning with a thick, leather-bound book. The cover was cracked and worn, its title obscured by time. "Take this," he said, almost whispering. "The stories in here. They're real. I should have left it there. My curiosity won." I paid for the book and hurried back to the cabin, eager to delve into its pages. The stories were chilling. Each tale detailed horrifying events that had occurred in the village, disappearances, mysterious deaths, shadows in the woods that whispered your name. As I read, the temperature in the cabin seemed to drop. The fire crackled but offered no warmth. That night, I dreamt of a forest. I was running, my feet sinking into the snow, something monstrous chasing me. When I woke, claw marks marred the wooden floor near my bed. The following nights were plagued with disturbances. I'd hear faint laughter outside the cabin, though no one was there. Shadows danced across the walls, flickering in the firelight. One evening, as I flipped through the book, I noticed a new story written in fresh ink, a story about me. Desperate for answers, I approached the villagers. Most dismissed with uneasy smiles, but one woman, Anna, hesitated before speaking. "There's a reason we don't talk about the past," she said, her voice trembling. "The forest's alive, and it demands tribute." She explained the legend of Kravos, a demon bound to the woods centuries ago. Hekan villagers had struck a deal. Celebrate Christmas with unwavering joy and Kravos would remain appeased. But if someone disturbed the balance, the demon would awaken. I thought of the book, the old man, the fresh ink. That night the cabin was alive with activity. The laughter was louder, more guttural. Shadows didn't just flicker. They lunged at me. The book lay open on the desk, pages turning on their own, the ink bleeding into grotesque images. I decided to burn it. As the flames consumed the book, the cabin shook violently. The windows shattered, and a deafening roar echoed from the woods. I stumbled outside only to see the villagers gathered in the square, their faces twisted in terror. Kravos had awoken. Hekan demon emerged from the forest, a towering figure of shadow and fire. Its eyes glowed red, scanning the villagers as if searching for something, or someone. Then it turned to me. Anna screamed, but I couldn't move. My legs were rooted to the spot as Kravos advanced. Just as it reached me, a blinding light erupted from the square's Christmas tree. The villagers had gathered around it, chanting an ancient hymn. The light grew brighter, forcing Kravos back into the woods. The village fell silent once more. The next morning, the villagers avoided me. The cabin felt colder, emptier. When I returned to the shop to confront the omen, it was gone, as if it had never existed. As I packed to leave, I found a single page from the burned book on my desk. It read, "You cannot escape. He will find you." I haven't been back since, but every Christmas Eve, I hear faint laughter outside my window and shadows flicker on my walls. It was 2 days before Christmas, and the mall was alive with a chaotic kind of energy. The kind that feels like it's balancing on the edge of frenzy. Kids cried over toys parents wouldn't buy, shoppers juggled armfuls of glossy bags, and the air smelled like cinnamon, sweat, and desperation. I wasn't there to shop. I hated Christmas. Too much cheer, too many people, not enough quiet. But I needed a last-minute gift for my nephew, so I braved the crowds. The centerpiece of the mall was a towering Christmas tree adorned with glittering lights and ornaments that seemed to pulse in the artificial glow. Beneath it sat a Santa's village, a garish display complete with fake snow, oversized candy canes, and a man dressed as Santa taking photos with reluctant children. His laugh, ho, felt too loud, too forced as if it were hiding something darker. I was standing in line at a toy store when it happened. The lights flickered. Just once, but be a chatterbuff to make everyone stop and glance up. A woman near me muttered about the power grid. Then I saw him. A man in a Santa suit, but the one from the village. This guy was taller and leaner, and his suit looked it wrong. It was faded, almost dirty, and his beard hung limp and yellowed, like cotton candy left in the rain. He was standing just outside the toy store, staring directly at me. I turned away unnerved, but when I looked back he was gone. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just imagining things. But as I made my way through the mall, I kept catching glimpses of him. Near the food court, at the entrance to an escalator. Always at the edge of the crowd, always watching. The worst part was that no one else seemed to notice him. By the time I made it to the second floor, my nerves were frayed. I ducked into a bookstore, hoping to lose myself in the aisles. That's when I noticed the music. The mall had been blasting Christmas carols all day, but now the speakers were playing something else. Something warped. A distorted version of Silent Night. The notes stretched like a broken music box. And then the lights went out. The emergency lights kicked on, casting the mall in a sickly green glow. People muttered and shuffled, their faces pale in the airy light. I tried to keep calm, but my heart was racing. That's when I heard it, the sound of bells. Not the cheerful jingle of Christmas bells, but something deeper, heavier, like chains being dragged across the floor. It was coming closer. I turned a corner and froze. There he was, the Santa from before, standing at the end of the aisle. Only now his eyes weren't human. They glowed a dull red like embers in a dying fire. He started walking toward me. He's slow and deliberate, his boots echoing on the tile floor. Panic took over. I ran, weaving through the aisles, knocking over displays in my east. I could hear the bells behind me, louder now, accompanied by a low guttural laugh. Somehow I made it back to the main mall area. The crowds had thinned, and those who remained seemed off. Their movements were jerky. Their heads tilted at unnatural angles. One woman turned to me, her face blank, her mouth moving as if she were trying to speak, but no sound came out. I didn't stop. I bolted for the exit. But when I got there, the doors wouldn't open. That's when I saw the tree. The massive Christmas tree in the center of the mall was different now. Its ornaments were gone, replaced by strange, writhing shapes that looked disturbingly organic. The lights flickered, casting shadows that seemed to move on their own, and at the base of the tree stood Santa. Not the man, Kit, but something else entirely. His suit was now blackened and charred, his beard a tangle of ash and cobwebs. His eyes burned brighter, and his mouth twisted into a grin that split his face unnaturally wide. He raised a hand, and the crowd turned to face me, their movements synchronized like marionettes on strings. I backed away, my mind racing for an escape. My eyes landed on the Santa's village. The fake snow, the oversized props. It was ridiculous, but it was my only chance. I sprinted toward it, grabbing a candy cane prop as I ran. The crowd followed their footsteps, a chaotic drumbeat behind me. When I reached the village, I turned to face them, gripping the candy cane like a weapon. The Santa thing stood at the front, his grin wider than ever. "This is my season," he growled, his voice like gravel. "You don't belong here." I don't remember much after that. When I woke up, I was lying in the snow outside the mall. The building was dark, its doors locked. The crowds, the music, it was all gone. The only proof that any of it had happened was the candy cane prop still clutched in my hand, now splintered and stained. And that's my story. A Christmas shopping trip turned nightmare. Have you ever felt like something watching you in a crowd? Or see something you can't explain? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you enjoy tales that remind us how thin the line is between the merry and the macabre.